It's just some years. And then we have some political changes, but we also have three returns. And the three returns, the first one is under Zerubbabel, and that's in 536. And when Zerubbabel, they brought about 50,000 people, just a little bit short of 50,000 people that answered the call of Cyrus. Will you go and rebuild? And so roughly it was 49,000 people that came, but roughly, and that was the largest group that came, and the temple was started. In fact, they started working on the temple, and they got the foundations laid, and they started having a celebration, and it took about 2 years. Larry, what do you think about that? 2 years to build the foundations. Yeah. So, anyway, that's as far as they got, because then there was opposition, and the whole thing came to a screeching halt. So, that first return under Zerubbabel, 536. So we mark 536 as the end of the Babylonian captivity, because Cyrus says, you're all free to go back home. So that actually ends the Babylonian captivity, because they're not being captive anymore. Now if they stay, it's of their own free will and their choice. Up to this point, they couldn't go home. Now 536, they're able to go home. Okay, now I want you to look at that one chart. I don't know if I've got it. Do I have that? Yeah, I do have it right here. Okay, and we looked at this. In fact, now you got two copies. I made you a copy last week, and now I made you another copy this week. I must have wanted you to know something about this, huh? So I want you to see something. You had 3 deportations, and now you have 3 returns. And so the first return is under Zerubbabel, and that'll be 536. The second return, 457, under Ezra. And the third return, 445, and that's with Nehemiah. Now, what did Nehemiah do? Built the walls. Okay. And what was the concern of Ezra? The rebuilding of the temple, finishing the temple. And so you've got Zerubbabel, and the temple is started, and then Ezra comes with more people, and there's there's the third return. Okay, so you can mark the 70 years 2 ways. You can mark it either from 606 or 605. It depends on who you're looking at. There will be 606 or 605 for the first deportation, when Daniel and his friends are taken. You can mark 70 years from the first deportation to the first return and get 70 years. All right? So you can say, well, that group of people, 70 years. Okay. Or you can mark it from the last king and the destruction of the temple to the temple being finished and dedicated in 517. And so you can get roughly 70 years out of both of those times. And I kind of prefer this one. And the reason I prefer that is because Israel could not have a covenant relationship with God without the presence of what building? The temple. Because as in their relationship with God under the law, they had to have the temple for their sacrifices. They had to have the temple for their festivals. They had to have the temple in order for the Day of Atonement and so on, to go on. So that it really is important to understand why these people should return. If you have to be back in Jerusalem to practice this God-ordained relationship with Him under the law, then why aren't you going back, all you able-bodied people? Isn't that a question that should have been asked at that time? But many of them were comfortable. And many of them were settled in. Many of them had never even seen Jerusalem. They were in the 70 years' time. big share of these people have never been to Jerusalem. And you can understand. They don't know anything but life in that part of the world. So it was hard for them. It raises a lot of questions. Should Esther have gone? Probably so. But even though she didn't go back, and Mordecai, even though he's somewhat aged, seems that he's still of enough energy to take on positions of authority, and maybe he could have made the trip too. There's a lot of unanswered questions. I'm going to ask Esther when we get there, if I remember that. So I just want you to notice we have 3 returns, and how that you can mark 70 years in 2 ways, okay? All right. Now we read that scripture already. So then we have 3 prophets during this time. You've got Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And I gave you a chart. I gave you a chart in your lesson last week, but I noticed then I hadn't filled it all out, which wasn't so nice. It's the chart that looks like this. Is on page 89 of your notes. Are you missing page 89? Anybody else missing page 89? Do we have any other copies? 89. From today's lesson? 89. Teresa, do you have any more copies of the whole thing? Okay, put your hand up if you don't have page 89. Anybody missing any other pages? How many of you are missing page 100? I didn't print page 100 yet, so. Okay, should have through 91. All right, it looks like maybe 3 copies or so. Now I want you to look down at on the back side on page 90, and I've got Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi down there. I just want you to look with me. First of all, Haggai, and his name means festival. And then we have given some little key handles for the books. And for him, we've given the handle, finish the temple. His ministry happens probably in about 520. Who is he writing to? The returned Jews. Where is he writing from? He's in Jerusalem. And writing to these people. And now here is a kind of a summary. The work of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem had begun in 538, but because of opposition, stopped 2 years later. In 520, through the encouragement of Haggai and Zechariah, the people began to finish the temple. Okay, and so he had an important ministry of encouraging them. I know the local opposition and authorities said not to do it, but we have a decree from Cyrus, and Cyrus said, do it, and he will finance it. And so, don't use the excuse that you've got local opposition. You go ahead and do it. And so then, that was the encouragement there. All right. Zechariah, the temple needed to be finished. Zechariah encourages those living in Judah to finish it. And Messiah is going to come in power and great glory. But let's be faithful to him and finish building the house for him. And then Malachi. Now I want you to notice that Malachi is writing about 450 to 430. He would be the final prophet of that Old Testament period. And when he is writing, notice that we started this thing way back in what year? did they start building the temple? 538. 536, 538, something in that area. All right, so we've started building it then, and now we are not quite 100 years, but getting close to that. Now it's 430, and we're not done with it. Well, we are, yeah, they finished it, but now the problem is that they have, that the glory of the Lord has not yet entered the temple, and the people have become kind of disillusioned, and they don't have a very small group of them, and they're wondering, where are the glory days that were talked about by Ezra and Haggai and Zechariah? Now, where are the glory days, and where's the fulfillment of all that was supposed to happen? We finished the temple, but the glory of God has not filled it. And so a lot of the people were just disillusioned, and religion became to them kind of like a ritualism. Became ritualistic. And they also got kind of lax on their social relationships, and they weren't following the Lord like they should, and they're back to marrying people they shouldn't marry. And so Malachi comes on the scene to encourage people. You get back to God. If you want the blessing of God, you have to live in obedience to God. If you want God to bless us as His covenant people, then you must take your relationship socially seriously. Malachi's the one that opposes divorce. You remember that? And the question is asked, why don't we have prosperity? And then Malachi comes back with all these answers. Because of this, and this, and this, and this. When are you going to get serious about your relationship with God? Because if you're not serious with that, why do you expect the blessing of God? It's interesting. Somebody look, what is the last word of the book of Malachi?